Terrace team to tell you that we went in and we were very open and transparent, and we were good faith in our negotiations. So that's where we were. We did want the feedback. So overall, we had 6 different meetings, 3 with the community group and 3 with the Sea Life Center. I do want to thank all of the individuals that participated for their time, and again, I think it was very invaluable. One of the first questions that we received from the citizens group was why are you doing a rate study today? Basically, it's being driven by 3 factors. The first is we want to make sure we're continuing to trend toward cost of service allocation. And that way we do not have any one customer group that's way underpaying or any one customer group that's way overpaying. So that was very important to us. Secondly, we need to make sure that we maintain the financial health of our utility. And what that means is we have to continue to invest in the infrastructure and the maintenance that it takes to run a safe utility, but also one with a high level of service reliability. And then finally, we recognize, because of the extremely high usage of our 3 largest customers, and that's the Sea Life Center, it's JAG, and it's Icicle Seafoods. I think their name may be different now. But we recognize, because of their high usage, we needed to provide an industrial rate that would be more fair to them because of how much energy they're using. And also putting them on an industrial rate would allow them to better manage their energy usage. So as far as timing of any changes that we look at making, if approved by the council, we would be looking at January of 2022. The Sea Life Center special contract currently expires at the end of this year. And so for us to implement any rate changes, it makes sense to do it when their contract expires so that we can do all of the changes simultaneously. With that, I think at a high level, we're pleased with where we're landed as far as what our recommendation is. I think that we worked hard because we did not want to have a huge impact on any one customer group. And so, I thank Mike for his time and effort as well. And as we look to the future so that we can move toward rate stability, our plan is to evaluate our rates every 3 to 4 years as we move forward. And I think that's kind of a cycle most utilities try to be on. I would like to get Seward on that same sort of track. With that said, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you walk through your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Good evening to all. The slide presentation, if we could go to slide 2, please. And what I'm going to do tonight is go through a few terms and then kind of expand a little bit more on why we do and how we do cost of service studies. And then I'm going to talk about your existing rates and how they might compare to other utilities in the area. Then we'll actually get into the analysis itself and then get into our recommendation. And I'll go through this, some of the early things kind of fast. I know that some of you have seen these in the past, but for those of you that haven't, I just kind of like to touch on some and kind of refresh everybody's memory as we go along. So slide 3. The City of Seward Electric Department, when it provides power to everybody, when it sends out a bill, it has 2 types of rates. One is the base rate, and the other is the cost of power adjustment, or the COPA. And the base rate is put in place to collect your system costs, all your costs except for the fuel and purchase power. And the way you do that is you have a customer charge, which is in dollars per month. You also have an energy charge, which is in dollars or cents per kilowatt hour. And for your larger customers, demand during the month. And the base rates are only charged through the council. As we're going through this is, you'll be looking at changing the base rates. The cost of power adjustment, on the other hand, or the COPA, that's in place and it fluctuates every month. Right now it fluctuates every month based on what your cost of power is from Chugach. And Chugach, in turn, they charge you base rates, customer charge, energy charge, demand charge, and they also charge you a fuel and purchase power adjustment, which is similar to the COPA, just another word for COPA, another term. And you change your COPA every month. It does not have to be. It could be every quarter. Could be semi-annual or whatever. But it should be kind of on a 1 to 3 month basis because you don't want to get too far out of line.
Mike, I'm going to jump in. Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone here knows that our COPA here in Seward, we adjust monthly. Chugach, who we buy our power from, they change theirs quarterly. And so as we look at our power supply contract negotiations with Chugach moving forward, I think we're going to make a recommendation to move to it quarterly as well. I think that'll help stabilize rates.
Okay. And what you'll do is you'll keep a balancing account such that if there's over collection or under collection, that's made up in the following period. That's included. That over collection or under collection is included in the amount that you're going to collect. So next slide, slide 4. Now we're going to get a little more technical here. And it all starts with peak demand. And the peak demand, we all know what energy consumption is, but peak demand is the maximum rate of energy usage during a period, typically over a month. And it's typically measured over a 15-minute period. And energy is measured in kilowatt hours or megawatt hours. Demand, on the other hand, is measured in kilowatts or megawatts. Now we allocate a number of costs, revenue requirements to each customer class based on their coincident peak and non-coincident peak. And the class coincident peak is the demand of that class at the time of the system peak. And their non-coincident peak is the peak demand of that class regardless of the time. And you can see on the chart here that at the time of the system coincident peak, which is the blue line, that would be what the class coincident peak is. And the non-coincident peak may be at that time, or it may be at some other time. And so as we go through this, I'm not going to give you a quiz on this or anything, but just to kind of give you a background of how we kind of come up with these factors and what they're used for. So next slide, slide number 5. Why are cost of service studies performed? Well, Rob kind of touched on that. It's simply to make sure that the cost causer is the cost payer. If you were rate regulated by the RCA, which you are not, but if you were, you would have to do a cost of service study to change your rates. And so there is a methodology that they prescribe, and that methodology is what we use in our analysis. And if you don't set it up that way, if one rate class is being subsidized by others, or if it is subsidizing the other classes, then the investment decisions made by that customer or that class might not be in the best interests and of the others. So say if they're being subsidized by the others, they're paying a low rate, and they're not doing anything to shift their demand, and Chugach is billing you based on your peak demand, then everybody else is kind of picking up that load. Whereas on the other hand, if they're subsidizing everybody else, then they may not do things that is in the best interest of them or the rest of the group. So we really need to kind of at least strive for cost of service. We don't have to be exact, but we should kind of move that way. Keep on that track. Slide 6. So, how are cost of service studies performed? Well, your expenses, the expense of the utility is based on a number of factors. They're based on the number of customers and how large the customers are. If you had your own generation, it would be based on how much energy you're required to produce. But you're buying power from Chugach, and so they in turn are going to charge you an energy charge based on how much energy you're selling. So recognizing this, NARUC, or the National Association of Regulatory Commissioners, they developed a manual that sets forth the methodology for allocating the cost of the various customer classes. And this book, it's known as the NARUC manual, is required by the RCA if you were going through a rate process with them. And like I say, you're not regulated, but we have used that process. We've used the NARUC manual in how we go through this with their rate study here. The thing I want to stress, though, is that it's not an exact science. And if we can go to slide 7, we see kind of the process here. And what we do is we first come up with the revenue requirements, and then we functionalize them. Are they generation related, transmission related, and so on and so forth. And your accounting, the accounting basis of your budgeting process, that does that already. But you can see that these costs, these various functions, are dependent on a number of different things. And so we therefore classify them based on what they're kind of dependent on. And once we classify those costs, we then allocate them to each customer class based on that class's contribution to that classifier. So in other words, if we have a bunch of costs that are classified as energy, we allocate them to each customer class based on their respective energy usage. Number of customers, again, based on that class's contribution to the number of customers. But where we kind of get into where we have to make some estimates and so on is when they're classified as being related to coincident peak or non-coincident peak. And we have to come up with some estimates of what each class's contribution to coincident peak and non-coincident peak is. Sometimes we can get really close. If the class is made up of 1 or 2 or 3 customers that are demand metered, we know pretty much what their coincident peak is. If it's 1 customer in that class, we know exactly what their coincident peak or non-coincident peak is. And if they're large customers, we have a pretty good feel for what their contribution to non-coincident or coincident peak is. But we do have to make some estimates for others, and load research has been done for other utilities, and we've applied that to you guys. And I've done this before the commission, and they've accepted it because load research is very expensive to do. You have to go out and get hourly data from various customers and so on. very time-consuming, very labor-intensive, and it's very costly. And so this is kind of what we have to do to save that money. And like I say, the commission has readily approved that whenever I've gone before the commission. So next slide, slide 8. Where these are your rates in place, and I'm not going to read you this chart. You can see the chart. I just want to, just kind of remind everybody that we have a seasonal rate for residential and small general service. The only rate that is demand metered is the large general service and the special contract. What I do want to point out here is that your COPA, the 2020 average, the COPA that everybody except for the Sea Life Center pays is based on the entire Chugach bill, which is Chugach's fuel and purchase power costs, it's their demand charge, it's their energy charge, and it's their customer charge, which is a very minuscule amount for the entire bill. The special contract with the Sea Life Center, on the other hand, is only based on Chugach's fuel and purchase power cost. And therefore, it's about 3.5 cents or so less the special contract is paying for COPA versus everybody else. And so that equates to, based on the 2020 average, that equates to about $160,000 per year that the other customers are picking up. So, slide 9, if we can go to the next slide. How do your rates compare to others? And show your average usage per customer, average monthly usage. And you'll see on this, on the left-hand side, as you go down the column there, you see large general service and then potential industrial. And the potential industrial are 2 customers that are currently large general service. So I split them out and just kind of show them on their own separate line. But as you can see that your rates, and this is based on a snapshot in time, it's based on the rates, the COPA that everybody had in effect in January of 2021. And your rates for everybody is less than home. As compared to Chugach, your residential are lower than Chugach during the winter, but higher during the summer. On average, it's about the same, a little bit more than Chugach North, which would be Chugach recently bought Anchorage Municipal Light and Power. That would be CEA North. Small general service, you are higher than them, than Chugach. And the large general service is, you're kind of comparable to Chugach. The potential industrial, and this is based on the large general service rate. Your rates would be, again, kind of comparable to Chugach, the old MLMP system, but a little bit higher than the Chugach system itself, the core system. And the Alaska Sea Life Center is less than everybody. And I think, and then that Chugach, as I said, Chugach bought MLMP, and they will be going through a rate study like this in a couple of years. And I'm not sure. I believe they're either going to use 2021 as a test year until they'll do the rate study next year, or they'll use 2022 as a test year, and the rate study will be the following year. And it will be several months after that that they implement the Dugash, at some point in the near to mid future, will be coming up with new rates.
So Mike, when you say the takeaway then from this slide is simply that our rates are competitive if you start comparing them to other rail belt utilities?
Yeah, yeah, and you know, I mean, I haven't included everybody, but I've included those that are close to you. And, you know, there's reasons for differences. You know, but yeah, you're relatively close, and in some cases you're much better. So let's get into the crunching the numbers and the analysis. So we could flip forward to 2 slides over to slide 11. The first question we kind of run into is, what do we base the sales on? Do we base it on, you know, some point in the past, you know, some point in the future, or what? So these are your sales over the last 9 or 10 years, 9 years, I guess. And they've kind of steadily decreased, but in this last year, they did increase a bit. And part of that, you know, in digging down into the numbers, a lot of the usage went up a little bit, rebounded a little bit. But for the small general service, they went down. And I think it's pretty obvious on that in the sense that small general service went down because of the pandemic, things are being closed down and so on. Residential is up probably because they're at home more and they're, you know, not going out to eat, they're cooking more and so on and so forth, doing more at home. So it's something that, you know, we're going to have to kind of watch, and I'll say it now and then repeat it later on, but it's something that, you know, we have to keep the results kind of like I said, it's not an exact science, and things may shift around in 3 or 4 years. So we need to revisit these things in 3 or 4 years. And right off the bat, I'm going to say, and Rob is tired of me saying this to him, but it's not going to be me because I'm retired. And so when I say you need to do it again in 3 or 4 years, I'm not looking for future work. Pure and simple. So, anyway, we're going to use the 2020 energy sales. If we go to the next slide, slide 12, what are our revenue requirements? Well, we're going to use the 2021 budget, but we're going to adjust it a little bit. We're going to eliminate all the generating fuel and purchase power costs that were in the budget because those are recovered through the COPA. And the budget also had revenues from sales of electricity, and we're going to take that out because we're going to calculate that independently. The budget did not have adequate funds for right-of-way clearing, and so we added $250,000 in for that, and that is reflective of the bids that have come in. We're then going to add something for a margin. We don't want to set rates for just the budget because if sales are lower than expected or expenses are higher than expected, then we're going to, you know, operate at a loss. And these rates, what we're trying to do is set up these rates to be fixed, other than the COPA, but the base rates will be fixed for the next 3 or so years. And so therefore, we put in a margin of $300,000. And that is gives us a total of about $6.8 million of revenue requirements. So the $300,000 is a pretty small percentage of that. And keeping in mind that we're trying to keep these rates fixed for the next 3 or so years, you know, that, in my mind, that $300,000 is pretty much, you know, you don't want to go much below that.
And Mike, and let me make one point on
Yep.
the right-of-way clearing. If it works the way that we're wanting it to work, then we would get approval from the council to move forward this year with our right-of-way clearing efforts on transmission. And later this evening, you'll see some more information and we have a resolution. But keep in mind, if we get approval from the council on the rate study, this would not go into effect until January 2022. We would be spending money already in this calendar year for some of that right-of-way clearing, the most crucial part of it. But just want to make that point that while that money's there, you actually will not see it being collected until 2022, even though we're going to be spending money this year.
Okay, we move to the next slide, slide 13. Talk about just a little bit before we get into the results. I'd like to just kind of go over the COPA one more time. The Sea Life Center does pay a lower COPA than everybody else, and had they paid the same COPA as everybody else, the effective COPA that could be charged to everybody would be about 0.3 cents per kilowatt hour less. And for everybody except for the Sea Life Center, who would be paying more. And the 0.373 cents does not sound like a lot, but it does equate to about $2 a month for the average residential user. So, and the COPA is based on purchase power costs, and those purchase power costs will go up and down based on your energy requirements and based on your peak demand and so on and so forth. So the COPA will be, the actual COPA will be what it is. But, so when I talk about the COPA and so on in these future numbers, I'm basing everything on the average that was charged in 2020. And like I said, there was a difference between the two averages, between the core and the Alaska Sea Life Center, of about 0.3 cents.
And Mike, one other point, just to reiterate, I think you said it earlier, is that when you look at a COPA, it's the portion of the overall rate that's a direct pass-through to every consumer that's using electricity, based on how much the utility is spending to generate electricity, for the most part.
Right. There's no markup on it or anything. No. Okay, so let's get into the results. Slide 14. This is the results based on the existing rate classes. So we have residential, small general service, boat harbor, large general service, special contract, and street lights. And what I have highlighted here is that you can see on the COPA that, excuse me, everybody except for the special contract is the revenues for COPA are higher than the allocated cost, and that's because they're making up the difference for the special contract. Now, you'll see here that the residential, if we look just at the base rates, they are 7% lower than their allocated cost of service. And the small general service is, their rates are 7% higher than the allocated cost of service. Now, this may be a little bit different than what we looked at last time in 2014. And the reason for that was that there was an error in my model last time, in 2014, when we were trying to come up with and estimate the non-coincident and coincident demands for those two classes. And when I was trying to kind of make everything come up to what it should be in total, I came up with the wrong, or allocated it a bit differently than what I should have. And so we've corrected that in this model here. And so that's why these two rates, it only affected those two rates there. The others it did not. And so that's why you see these two rates a little bit closer than what you might have expected if you remember what we did in 2014. A couple of other, or two other things of note here is you'll see the percentages are high for the boat harbor and streetlights. For both of those, they're relatively low amounts of money, and therefore, especially with streetlights. So if you're off by just a little bit, the percentage is going to be very high. So I'm not too concerned about those percentages there. And secondly, the boat harbor, and I wrote this up in the report, the boat harbor, when I was using some load analysis data to come up with coincident peak and non-coincident peak, what I was using it from, the source did not have anything for boat harbor. And so I believe, in my mind, I think that they are being under-allocated just a little bit. And so again, I would not be, I would think that they would be allocated a little bit more if we could get more refined in the boat harbor itself. So just keep that in mind as we go along, that they might be being under-allocated here. But what it says here is that overall, the rates would have to be increased by about 1%. Revenues would be about $60,000 short of that overall revenue requirement. Now, if we go to slide 15, we've done the allocation this time with setting up an industrial rate class. And in that industrial rate class, I've included JAG, Icicle, and the Alaska Sea Life Center, 3 customers. And for this particular slide right here, the revenues are based on large, setting the rate for the industrial class at large general service. And in this case, you can see that the total revenues collected are about right on your revenue requirements, just a little bit short. But that means that you would have to put the Alaska Sea Life Center on the large general service rate right away. And so that is, that would produce pretty much of a hardship for them right away. So we're trying to strive for something else to see if we can kind of phase into this. There's also other factors to kind of keep in mind as we go along here. So if we go to slide 16, the street and harbor percentages and harbor being allocated, I've already gone through that, so I'll skip that right now. But the allocation of the industrial rate class might be a little bit high. And if we look at the total cost allocated per customer, we see that residential and small general service are at the lower end of the spectrum. Boat harbor is going up because there's not many customers there. Large general service is up even farther, and which we would expect because it costs more to provide service to them. We have to put in 3-phase and so on and so forth. But the industrial customer, which we'd expect to be I couldn't come out to do, to sit down and talk with the engineers, talk with everybody about, and go through maps and so on, that you could kind of get a better feel for how many customers per mile and so on and so forth. So I think, in my mind, that those things can be corrected at the next time you do the next rate study. And they can be corrected. But, so in my mind, I think that we need to kind of consider setting the industrial rate a little bit lower than cost of service. Because I'm just kind of concerned about that large number there. So, having gone through all that result, all those numbers, the results, and considerations, and so on, if we go to slide 17, we'll come up with our recommendation for your consideration, and certainly and we'll listen to you and run other numbers if we have to. First of all, we need to move the Alaska Sea Life Center to the full COPA. Like I say, they're paying one rate that's about a little under 3.5 cents to everybody else, than everybody else is. And so we would increase the COPA to the Sea Life Center. What that means, again, is that, okay, we're shifting the cost that the Corps is picking up from them, so that reduces their costs, the Corps customer costs. And for the average residential user, it's $2 per month. We saw earlier, and I'm basing this on the slide 15 with the industrial rate class in our classifications or in our consideration. But we saw that their base rate was about 9% too low. So we would nudge up the residential customers a bit. And if you nudge it up and increase the energy charge by 0.31 cents per kilowatt hour, for the average user, residential user, that's $2 per month. But on the other hand, they're going to be getting a reduced COPA as compared to what they would have charged if the Sea Life Center were continue paying a reduced COPA. The residential is going to get a $2 a month decrease. So this kind of gets them, it's no net impact to the residential, and it gets them to about 6% of the allocated cost of service. And that's kind of where I hold the line, because, like I say, the pandemic has kind of changed usage patterns and so on, and in 3 or so years from now, we may see them that they're not contributing quite so much to the coincident, non-coincident peak and so on, and we would, we might see a little bit more, a shift more towards commercial accounts. I would then set the industrial rate at 5% less than cost of service. And so we're going to come up with, what we're doing is coming up with a rate that the revenues collected from all three customers, industrial customers, the revenues collected is 5% less than cost of service. Now, this would increase the Sea Life Center's power cost by quite a bit. So what we're doing to phase that in is, for this recommendation here, is that we would base their initial costs, their initial year rates in 2022, be based on the total revenue requirements less $75,000. And then we would phase them up to the full industrial rate over 3 years. And
Mike,
keep in mind that, again, that these rates are we're verify that 5% less than cost of service is a valid number, or should be higher, should be lower, or what. And like I say, it's something you probably want to do, you know, again, perform, as Rob said too, is perform these every 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, and Mike, just one quick note on that. The transition on the base rate for the Alaska Sea Life Center would start in 2023, not in 2022. And the way we have it currently set up, it would be over 3 years, starting in 2023, 2024, 2025.
Okay, so slide 18, cost impacts. And again, what I'm going to show is based on, these are all based on the 2020 average COPAs, and COPA will be what it is, just based on Chugach's cost. So slide 19. We see that for both winter and summer rates, it's essentially rate neutral. The base rate is being increased by about $2, and the COPA is being decreased by about $2. So the average, the total impact is essentially a wash. Next slide for small general service. Their base rates would remain the same, but they would see a reduction in their COPA. And so not much, but a little bit, 10% of their bill or something like that, or excuse me, 1% of their bill maybe. The higher the usage, the bigger the discount, just because of that COPA is based on energy. Next slide for Harbor. Again, we see them, their decrease is based purely on the COPA, reduction in COPA. And I believe there's 12 meters there, out there. And it's kind of like you're selling power to the Harbor in wholesale, because they in turn turn around and go out and read the meters and so and bill each individual customer out there. Large general service, slide 22. Because they're a higher user, using more power, they're not seeing a change in base rate, but they're seeing a reduction in the COPA. And finally, we get to the existing 2 large general service customers. There are, because they're demand related, and so we're kind of playing with the energy rate and demand rate to come up with the revenue, the target revenues being 5% less than allocated cost of service. I put in 2 different demand rates. In the top chart, the top table is based on the existing LGS rate, which is, I believe, $26 or something like that a month per kilowatt. And then I increased it to $30 per kilowatt a month on the lower part of the table. And in the $30, the higher demand charge, they're seeing a lower reduction, or a reduction in their savings. And the reason for that is that they're a kind of a peaking customer. Both of these are, and they're a kind of a peaking customer, so they're hit with that demand charge. The Sea Life Center, on their hand, is not quite so peaking. They do have some months where they have a pretty low load factor and are peaking, but it does not hit the Sea Life Center so hard as the higher demand charge hit the Sea Life Center as hard as these 2 customers. So finally, we go to the Sea Life Center here, and on slide 24, and we see what their annual power costs are under several different scenarios. The blue line represents a 10-year plan that the Sea Life Center provided us that said, you know, that this was what they kind of thought they were going to be working under. And the current rates, or the contract rate, there was a series of 2 or 3 year contracts, and those are represented by the red dots. Those followed that 10-year plan for a little bit and then kind of straight down a little bit. And then the actual rates I have in there for the last 2 years, and those were even less than the contract rate. And so you'll see on the red line there what we have proposed, and then moving up to the full rate. And again, what this is based on is that we're now cutting into our margin by $75,000 to reduce that rate to be able to phase them in. And so if we want to phase them in more gradually and not step up to that amount in 2022, then we can do that, but it has to come from somebody. We either have to lower our margins, and they're going to be pretty tight if they are, or we're going to have to raise rates for somebody else.
Now, Mike, hey Mike, this is Rob. I just want to make one point. I spoke with Tara earlier today, and I know she's got some updated information on this particular chart. So I think a little bit later here she'll be sharing that information.
Okay. So any questions or comments?
Well, I'll start with the public. We'll go ahead. Did folks submit public comments to be read, Jessica? No comments to be read. Okay, I'll turn it over to the public in-house. Tara, did you want to start?
I've got quite a bit. Are you okay with that?
Well, we'll try to limit it to 5 minutes.
Okay. I will do my best.
Okay.
I believe everyone has a copy of this page. I need to...
Sorry.
I need to give you some history so that you can understand and put in context what's happening, because what I heard from this presentation is the Sea Life Center's not paying enough, the Sea Life Center's not paying enough, right, over and over again. And so you need to understand where this came from. So before 2010, there was an industrial rate in this community, and the Sea Life Center was part of that industrial rate. In 2009, there was a decision to move away from an industrial rate, and I don't know why. The Sea Life Center was put onto a special contract starting in 2010 and is still currently on a special contract rate. Following the 2014 study that Mr. Hubbard did, it was decided that our special contract rate was too low, and there was an agreement made to move us into, at that point, large general service over 10 years. And so the slide that you have, the green line, is that 10-year trajectory. The difference with the blue is the only spreadsheet of John Fouts that I could find that was about 3 or 4 weeks before this was finalized. So it was a draft, it wasn't the final numbers. So the first special contract under this plan was 2016-2017, and you can see at the bottom the years that were part of the 10-year plan. The green dots mark the rates we were paying. And then the second one was 2018-2019. Now you've also heard a lot about we're not paying the full COPA. Well, the City of Seward did not use COPA-based rates until 2018. So I've got the reference if you would like that. That is something that was decided in 2017, and I found that referenced in something from 2019 that I'll get to later. So the 10-year plan for the Sea Life Center was put into place before COPA-based rates were part of Seward's way of doing things. There's been an understanding since 2015 that we are on a trajectory to get to paying our full fair share, but that before we get to 2025, we're not going to be paying our full fair share. And that was agreed to by council back in 2015. And then in 2019, there was a decision made to not do any rate adjustments for electric across the board in the entire community. This was done during the budget process at the end of 2019 for 2020. So this coincides with COVID, but this happened pre-COVID. Like, the decisions were made pre-COVID. They were actually made where I was on sabbatical, so I had to go back and read the council documents and the minutes to figure out what had happened, because I didn't even realize it had happened. So when you see that flattening of the solid green line, that was because the council that was in your seats at the time made a decision not to raise anyone's electric for those 2 years. And at that same time, there was an agreed extension to our 10-year plan, which is documented in the agenda statement for our contract for 2020 to 2021. So there was an understanding that it would take us 2 more years to get where we're supposed to be. And so what I'm requesting is that we continue the same plan, and I'll get back to kind of connect back to the rate study. But my request from the Sea Life Center is the orange line, which is the same rate of increase that was agreed to. And surprisingly, I thought it would extend through those 2 years. It actually gets us kind of where we're going to need to go by 2026. So definitely by 2027, where we were planning. And part of it may be because the original plan was get to large general service, not this new industrial rate. So I want everyone to understand that this is not a conspiracy. This is not us trying not to pay our fair share. It's been understood since 2015 that we're on a trajectory to paying our fair share, but that doing it suddenly could be very challenging. And so in those colored labels, you'll see that the original plan is to increase it $42,000 per year. The proposal, and I didn't quite understand this in the presentation, because what the presentation said is that our increases wouldn't start until 2023, but that graph shows it starting in 2022. So that's the assumption when I had the packet I was going under, that between now and 2022 we would be increasing $124,000 in 1 year. And so again, I can't reconcile that, but that's really increasing 3 years worth of increases in 1 year. And so what we're asking is it was a council decision in 2019 to go off of this plan and to freeze rates citywide, that we basically go back on the plan for 2022. And I don't really argue with any of the rate study. The rate study is the rate study. You know, there are some pieces in it that are, you know, as Mr. Hubbard said, you know, some of these things are estimated. It's not an exact science. You know, this 5% less on the industrial rate piece to me is a little bit like, well, it's just a little hand wavy. So there is some hand wavy part of it, but it's, you know, we would really be where we should be if it hadn't been for the decision to stop our, you know, to freeze everyone's rates at the end of 2019 and move back to that process. So I guess I kind of kept that to pretty much 5 minutes, but that's really what I wanted to explain and make sure everyone kind of understood the history, that the results of the study don't surprise me, because based on the study, we're midway, we're not quite midway to the end of the 10-year plan.
So if the 10-year plan didn't include COPA, how did not paying COPA come into it? Is it because the rate was just not adjusted?
No one paid. COPA, we actually paid. I remember, because Daryl would always say early on that we were the only customers in town whose rate changed every month, because we got the pass-through from Chugash every month, way before the rest of the community did.
Maybe if I can.
So I guess let me clarify my question. How come if you're paying COPA now, it's less than the actual COPA?
But wait a minute.
Yeah.
That's what I need to explain.
Yeah.
We paid the fuel adjustment surcharge always in our special contract.
Yeah.
That was not part of anybody else's rate. That changed every month. And we continue to pay that after the council adopted a COPA as part of its rate structure.
Yeah, your
for
contract
everybody
didn't
else.
include the other
Then
stuff that
included
goes into the whole COPA.
fuel and some other costs that Chugash passed on to the city every month. So that's that's the difference here too.
Yeah, and I guess from my perspective, or you, from the paying for the COPA is a direct pass-through cost. And however it ended up being less through the years, I just don't have that history with me. Mike may have a little more of that history than I do. But in Terra, and I think the Alaska Sea Life executives that we worked with will tell you that was the one area that we really don't feel like we can compromise, is on the COPA, because it is paying for the fuel to generate electricity that's directly passed through to every customer. We have more flexibility on the base rate portion of the overall rate. And that's the one that we're looking to transition over a 3-year period in tiers, so that we are not hitting the Sea Life Center all at one time. And Tara's right. If we were to look at the special contract and look at the new industrial rate, and we just ripped off the Band-Aid, then you're talking, you know, and Tara, I think it's actually closer to 170 or 80,000 overall. You would be looking at an impact of 16, 17, 18,000 a month. And we, in our 3 discussions with the Alaska Sea Life Center, with us giving up some of our margin as well on the electric side, we're able to move that number from the 16, 17, 18,000 a month down to approximately 8,000 a month. I think it's 82, 8,500 a month. And that's where we are now, but that will get them paying the full COPA with our reduction in margin, so that we're not hitting all of the other customer groups. Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that was fine. Okay.
So then, Daryl, did you want,
Yeah,
is there anyone else that wants to speak, and then we'll go to
I just
council?
wanted to make sure that everyone understood that we were a different creature. We had a special contract. We came in under the, in 2009, we qualified to get the industrial rate. And Phil Oakes was the city manager then. He didn't like that one bit, because that lowered our energy bill when we did so. We were paying about 13 to 14 cents a kilowatt in 2009. It lowered it down to under 8 cents a kilowatt when we got the then industrial rate. So he said, I want to get rid of the industrial rate, which he did with the help of the council, and put some of us, Sea Life Center, Icicle, the prison, the coal terminal, on special contracts, put us in a political process every other year, basically, to negotiate our rates in front of this political body, which is nothing that we ever wanted to be doing. But that's where we're here. And we always got the fuel adjustment surcharge as part of our contract from day one. And that changed every month.
Yeah.
I have the records going back showing, I can show you exactly what the change by month and by year. It was around 2 to 3 cents a kilowatt. It jumped up to 8 cents in some months. That's a significant number.
And
So, you know, that's,
yeah, and just speaking on behalf of the electric department, we recognize that there have been arrangements made in the past. That's why we're working hard to negotiate in good faith, because we do recognize, and we have more or less inherited the special contract that we have today. And now it's figuring out how we manage it moving forward. We really can't afford as an electric department to continue with the special contract, because it will continue to impact all other rates in the years ahead. So it's something we would always be trying to deal with and catch up to. So we're at that point where I feel like we need to start dealing with it today. And again, I recognize the Sea Life Center's position. I recognize that this has kind of developed over the years. Not sure there's any fault to be had on any side. I think the community was trying to help in many ways, But at some point, we, in the council, need to look at how we deal with it, and I think that's where we are. And just one note on the 10-year plan or the 12-year plan, it's just that, it's a plan that was discussed and agreed to by the electric department and the Sea Life Center, but it was not a contract. The contract itself was for every 2 years, and so the contract with the Sea Life Center actually expires at the end of this year, but that 10-year, 12-year plan, whatever it was, is still out there, and it was supposed to run, if it was 10 years, through 2025. If it was 12 years, 2027. That's where we are.
Council comments, questions, Councilmember Cease?
I just wonder then, will the cost of the Sea Life Center not have to pay Juliet separately now? Did you say that you paid?
We pay him.
Oh, you pay them, oh, never mind, I thought it was just that amount that you paid. Okay.
Councilmember Huskerly, I know you have a lot of history with this. You've been on the council, and then also Councilmember McClure. I don't know if you two, did you have any comments or questions?
I do. I have a lot. I'll limit me to 5 minutes as well.
Well, I think, we have about, 15 minutes, and we'll just give each other a 5-minute break.
This study's really great, but there's nowhere in here where it actually breaks down costs. So it's in lump sums of what we're gonna get. There's no cost per kilowatt hour. So to be able to compare like residential kilowatt hours or cost, right, is 0.02, and I don't see that anywhere. So if we could get something like that, I don't need to see what the overall bills are, what the overall money that one class is gonna generate. I need to see, like, is it gonna go from, is the SPU charge gonna go from 0.02 to 0.03, or what's the increase? I know there was one slide that showed it and broke it down, but if we could just see the rates that we have as a side-by-side, that would be really helpful, so that we can have a projection of where the rates are gonna go. In the slide on page 9, there's a comparison of our bills versus other people's bills, and I'm just curious, are you guys just comparing kilowatt hours, or are you putting in the customer service charge and the customer service? So I'm assuming that the bills that we're comparing, you're taking 2020's SPU plus one of our COPAs from a random month this year, combining those two, and that's the number that you guys are using to compare to another utility, and that does not include the customer service charge?
Could I could respond to that?
Sure, Mike, go ahead.
It is based on the energy that's in the slide there, which is the average usage per month. It is based on the cost of power adjustment that everybody had in place on January 1, 2021. So it's not random from one month to another or anything. It's all the same, it's at the same time period. And it is the total bill. It includes the customer charge, the energy charge, the COPA, and the demand charge if they're demand meter.
Great, thank you. Another question that I had, just from my meter reading experience, I know that there's a meter here at City Hall and a couple on 3rd Avenue that stop about where the old Seward Plumbing building used to be. And I question how many street lights aren't even metered. And I've always questioned that, because all those street lights along, as you come in, after you come over the 3 bridges, along where the school is and all of that, I don't believe there's a meter for those. And I'm just curious if maybe that's something that's throwing those street light numbers off.
Typically, street lights are not metered, and there's 2 ways that it's done. And one is that you take the wattage of the light and apply it to the number of hours that it's estimated to be on, and you look at daylight hours, darkness hours, and so on. And another way is that one meter or one street light is metered, and everything is tagged off of that. Or a couple lights are metered.
Which I think I have an email where I've asked that question, so I'll look it up.
Okay.
I'll look for it.
Yeah, we think and believe that we've had some lights in Seward that the lights themselves have been switched out to more efficient lighting that hasn't been calculated. And that goes back to the conversations around line losses and that sort of thing. So that's, again, something that we're looking at.
One of the other things is we have a minimum kilowatt hour charge. It doesn't matter if you use, I think it's 150 kilowatt hours. And so, I'm just wondering, I'm curious personally if we're gonna start talking about changing our rates and whatnot, and I don't know if this is the correct place to say it, but, for example, I know an apartment building that I personally manage, they're like 7 tiny studio apartments and they have 7 meters, and there's no way those 7 units or 7 meters would ever pull over the minimum amount. So they're just always paying for way more than what they're using. So I don't know how many other meters are like that, but that's something else that I would like to reevaluate, because I think ultimately I was sitting on council when we decided to implement that, and it was more so to encourage the snowbirds from shutting everything off, but it was not intended to punish the people that are here living year round. And it's
Yeah,
something.
the idea behind that really is if you have someone here that leaves for the winter, it's really what it was designed to do, and they use less than 150 kilowatt hours of electricity in a month, there is a base charge, and it's around $52 per month if you're using less than the 150 kilowatt hours. That's because as a utility, we still have to have the infrastructure and maintain that infrastructure. So we need some sort of money coming in from those meters, because they're just as responsible, even though they're not here, to help maintain the system. Otherwise, we would be just putting all of those costs on the people who remain in town.
Right, and I understand that, but I'm just saying, I would like to look at that, and I don't know if it's policy that we need to talk about as council, but for somebody that's got multiple meters, it's the same infrastructure. You have one address and you have 7 meters that are, I don't understand the justification of they need to help pay for and this is just one example. I mean, I know there's a lot of senior citizens in this town that live so extremely efficient, like have a light bulb and some other things, just trying to conserve on energy. It's just another thing that if we're looking at rates and studies, I'd really like to look at that again.
Can I interrupt you, and let's
Yeah.
have Vice Mayor Bacon. Did you have a question? Or
Yeah, I
comment?
guess I'm thinking about it now, and then when you explained it a little bit more, I kind of understand it. But I think the whole of it was to get people to pay, even though they're not going to be here. And I think on the other side, then it's then the owner's response or choice if they want to meter 7 different units and the size of the unit and how they're metering that. If you have somebody in there who's going to plug in a heater and needs a heater plugged in all day, I can understand as an owner you would want them to pay that, to pay for that and to have it being separated out. But then it would then be the owner's choice to meter all of those single ones and have people responsible for what they were using in consumption, or just saying this is a flat charge for electricity and it's included in your rent.
Something to look at. I don't know about, that's one case, but I think there's other people that are living here year round that are not hitting that are paying way more. Like, this whole study is for us to look at who's paying for more than what they're using, and it's just something that we need to look at. And as far as the COPA, So I don't know years or whatever that happened, but we've all had Chugach's fuel passed on to us for as long as I've been on council. My bills have changed and fluctuated depending on gas for time of eternity. So we've all been paying for fuel for as long as I can remember. But at one point, administration said, we're going to make everything more transparent, and we're gonna take the Chugach bill and we're gonna distribute it amongst everybody evenly. And then we're going to make rates for the different folks on different classes. And that's gonna be called the Seward Public Utility, which is the cost of our infrastructure. And COPA is the cost for our fuel. I was not aware that the Sea Life Center was paying any part of the COPA. I thought that they were paying none of the COPA, but according to this study, they're
they are.
paying a small percentage of the COPA.
They're paying about 6.3 cents on the COPA, and I believe, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, it's right around 9.8 cents for all other customers.
Right.
Is that correct?
The average was in 2020.
Yeah, it was about 3.5 cents difference.
We're paying 2/3 of it.
So, when we still have about, 10 minutes to go, obviously we weren't gonna accomplish everything in this work session. So what does administration see as like the next steps? Do you need questions from us? Are you gonna come forth and make a recommendation? Do you wanna outline some recommendations for us to say bring forward, or?
Well, I think that where we are from the electric department standpoint is we're pleased with our recommendation. We worked hard to get to this point where we were minimizing the impact to the various customer classes. The one item, as I said earlier, that we knew we would have to deal with was the Alaska Sea Life Center and the special contract. And the longer that's out there, the more that problem carries into the future. We feel like the negotiating we did and giving up some of our margin to help soften the blow, we feel like we have a good recommendation that we could move forward with. But we also wanted to bring it where we are today to this council and to you, the mayor, to see where we are with an understanding of some of the history that has gone on that Tara has outlined in her comments. I doubt that you will ever see me sitting here again before you with the various customer classes not having an increase of some sort. This is very unusual when you do something like this, but it's about getting to cost of service and minimizing the impact. In 3 or 4 years, when we look at this again, I will be very surprised if we're not asking for an increase in some of the customer classes, because we have some infrastructure and other things we're going to have to be investing in over the next 3 or 4 years that we're going to need to include in the next rate study. So I feel like we're in a fortunate place today to do what we're doing. I feel our recommendation is a good recommendation from the electric department, and I would ask the council to consider the recommendation, and we can write it up in a resolution or however you would like to receive it for your consideration.
So will it be in a resolution, or will it be part of the budget? What's the plan to have it come back to council?
Madam Mayor, it should be included in the budget. I think it's a budget thing. When we so much gets budget, it's got to come before council. It's it's got the public notice and all that. So I think that's what should come to you in budget form.
And then maybe Councilmember Casagrande had some earlier questions. Maybe you can just check with her on those.
Sure.
And if those get answered, get them out to all council.
Can I ask one more question to conclude that? Can you break down the difference of customer charge versus the SPU charge? Where does the customer charge money go? And is there any room for us to take one more step in simplifying our bills and get rid of that customer charge so that we only have SPU and COPA instead of all the different things that we're it's just, I'm really starting to see how these flat rate things that are on our bills are affecting the people that don't use the energy. And I know that they're there so that we're supporting our infrastructure because we're so small to make sure that we're getting that chunk, but it's also, I think there's some people in this town that can really use that efficiency.
So Mike, do you want to take a stab at that right now, or do you want to, let's circle back? Since
Well, we can circle back, but I would highly recommend not getting away with the customer charge. It is there for the protection of the utility. Number one, it helps provide a steadier income to the utility. Number two, if you looked at one of those slides and we talked about what the costs are and so on and so forth, all of your costs, other than the bill from Chugach, but all of your costs are fixed. And you're going to, while they may be dependent on the number of customers you have and how, the maximum demand and everything, that's where how you build your system. And once you have built that system, you now have the depreciation and carrying costs on it and so on and so forth. And all of those costs are fixed. And quite frankly, you should not have an energy charge, but you should have, and I'm not recommending this, but quite frankly, you should have a fixed charge no matter what, and no energy charge, because those costs are fixed. Now, I realize that we can't do that, but that's why we have customer charges in there.
Okay.
And finally, I would say that you need to have that customer charge as high as you can, as politically as high as you can, because if people start putting in their own self-generation, or just part of their load, or even their total load, again, those costs of your system are fixed. And who's going to end up paying those costs? If somebody has put in renewable generation that they're no longer using any energy, or just a little bit of energy from the utility, who's going to pay for those costs? It's the people that can't afford to put in their renewable generation. Those are the people that are going to end up paying higher costs because you have to raise rates. So that's why
Hey, Mike, I
strongly recommend
yeah,
that you keep the customer charge.
Mike, I'm gonna thank you for your time tonight. We're gonna take a quick break before our next meeting of 3 minutes, but we won't hold you to the budget comment. If this has to come as a resolution or has to come back to us in another format, you guys need what you need to do. We really have to adjourn. Okay, so we'll adjourn.
Does that mean I get off?
Hey, Mike,
you
you're
are
free.
done.